Welcome, welcome on Zoom and on Facebook. This is Comparative Methodologies of Talmud Study with Yonah Hain. This is our first session as part of Sfira Zman et Drisha. This class will trace two distinct styles of Talmud study, that of the yeshiva and that of the academy. Each week, we will examine a specific usable technique for analyzing the various dimensions of rabbinic literature. The yeshiva learning will feature unique principles of analytic philosophy, also known as lomdus, that students on every level can implement in their own studies, and the academic method will reveal the intricate layers developed to construct each Talmudic section. The goal is for students to gain an appreciation for more interdisciplinary approaches to Talmud. And for those who have not had the pleasure of learning with him before, Yonah Hain has been the campus rabbi at Columbia and Bernard Hillel for 15 years. Previously, he was on the rabbinic staff at NYU's Bronfman Center, which previously played host to Drisha as well. He serves on the faculty for Shalom Hartman's Institute and is adjunct faculty at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah's Rabbinical School. He is completing his coursework towards a doctorate in Talmud and Rabbinics at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And as always, for people who are coming in, we do want to hear your questions. You're welcome to ask them in chat on Zoom and Facebook Live. I will then bring them to Yonah's attention. And I'm also going to be, once things get underway, send people invitations to panelists in Zoom so they can turn on their cameras, unmute themselves, and ask questions directly. Sources for class will be shared in chat as well. And to everyone who's making time for Torah on an evening like this, thank you. Yonah, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Well, Kayla, hearing that introduction, I was happy to hear that it's outdated because I finished my coursework, thankfully, this spring 2024 semester. So what I want to do with our time over this series is develop the exact kind of course I wish I had had 20 years ago. See, I grew up and I was very, very fortunate to have every opportunity afforded me when it came to Torah study, both in my familial life, in my yeshiva school training, in my camp life. Torah study was available to me, and from a young age, rabbinic literature was something that I was really trying to master. And over the course of my studies, I started to see that there were many different disciplines and there were different approaches. And I always felt that I knew what I knew in my little bubble, but I wish I had access to others' training and methodologies. And I always wished that someone who spoke my language, but spoke another dialect as well, would sort of demystify the content for me. And that's what I really want to do. I want us to demystify what the material is, what it's about, what we're trying to do, what the purpose is, and irrespective of what our own personal experience has been, try to grow and share with one another and hopefully see the vast amazingness of our rabbinic tradition in new lights. So I don't know about you, but I have my video on. So I would encourage anyone who's here who would like to turn their video on, and we could find out for a moment. Let's actually give everyone a chance before they even turn on their cameras if they're comfortable. Let's populate the chat for a moment. If this is not your first time studying rabbinic literature, write something in the chat. Me, here, present, I. Great. Kayla's sharing a lot of info. Welcome, Debbie. Welcome, Esther. Great. Gap year. We're getting some info coming across. I think we're all beginners, Lisa. That's the point. Now, I would love if someone would share if this is their first time being exposed to rabbinic literature. Let's see if we have any takers. Safe to assume that most people have had some prior exposure. So let's continue in the chat for a second. When I say an academic method of Talmud, what's the first, don't filter. What's the first thing that comes to mind? And again, we're populating the chat here. Oh, beautiful. Non-traditional, someone wrote David Weiss Halivni. Text critical layers, Rachel, yes. Welcome. Onion, that's great too. I saw Shrek. So, and when I say yeshiva learning, what's the first thing that comes to mind? We have, this is great. Some personal, some evaluative, some descriptive. These are all great. And the truth is, I could spend this entire time differentiating between the two and talking about how different they are. After all, in one, you call it Gemara, and in one, you call it Talmud. Just the vernacular. But what we're going to do is we're going to study the two most popular ways that rabbinic literature is treated in these two broad categories. And of course, there are stripes within each. But what I want to do is give everyone an exposure to both, a toolkit for each. And then at the end, I want us to talk and assess how different are they, how similar are they, and maybe how historically developmental they were dependent on each other. Okay? So Esther, this is a great comment about two concepts behind every disagreement, and Brisker and Pilpul, and there are different methodologies, like we said, within each. I'm going to share my exposures, my trainings, but also what are the predominant stylings within each of these institutional approaches. Especially if you're on the Zoom panelist, feel free to unmute yourself, ask a question, clarifying question, a challenging question, any interactive as you'd like, please, by all means.
And just a note, if you are in the attendees box, if you use the raise your hand function or you ask me in chat, I can unmute you.
And at this time, can we share the documents?
Yes, just give me.
Great. So what we're going to do each week is we're going to look at a section of rabbinic literature, and we're going to use two lenses for each. And hopefully there'll be some skills developed. I don't want to be silly enough to say that this is going to set you up for a lifetime of scholarship in either of the disciplines, but it will definitely give a flavor. And our topic tonight is not of the moment. We're standing here during the Sfira Zman for Drisha between Passover and Shavuot, and I want to hearken us back to Megillah. Megillat Esther, hearken us back to Purim, because there's an interesting phenomenon when it comes to Purim. If you recall the Hebrew calendar, Purim has multiple dates. So, Kayla.
Yeah, is this the right document or the PowerPoint?
This is perfect. My question is, can we put it in the chat for people to download, and then
yep, that's going to happen.
I can screen share it when, you know what I mean? You're muted. Thank you. Perfect. And I'll screen share periodically when we're reading. So one of the interesting components of Purim is that there's some confusion around the date, right? If anybody has ever spent time in Israel during Purim, right? Jerusalem has a different date for Purim than the rest of the country. And that all harkens back to the text of the Megillah. And it starts with the first Mishnah in the Masechet Megillah, the tractate devoted to Purim. And what is conveyed in the very first Mishnah is that there are a range of dates on which the Megillah is read, which is pretty unique when it comes to the Jewish calendar, right? You can't necessarily bring even something like the Paschal sacrifice, which has a makeup date. There's no range, though. There's no range of, you can do it on the 15th of Nisan or the 16th of Nisan. It has to be the 14th of Nisan. But Esther can be read on quite a few different dates within the month of Adar. Sound good, everyone? And that's going to be our starting point. Again, I've been talking way too much. I'm sick of my own voice. So please interrupt, interject, challenge. All right. How is the visual? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to the size of the screen I'm sharing. Lisa went first and gave it a thumbs up.
Yeah. Could you put it either zoomed in or full screen if there's an option?
Sure.
Like if you go to the very bottom of your screen where there's 100%, you found it.
Better? I think I need to lower it a little. Okay. Good?
Thank you.
So we're going to read the beginning of Masechet Megillah. And this is where we establish that the Megillah can be read on different dates. So source number 1. Megillah nikret be'echadasar, be'shnemasar, be'shloshasar, be'arba'asar, be'chamishasar. The Megillah theoretically can be read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th days of the month of Adar. But lo pachot velo yoter. So there's a window, which is pretty wide, but you can't go earlier on the 10th or later on the 16th. How does this play itself out? Krachim hamukafin choma miyimot Yoshua ben Nun. So if there are cities that have, since the days of Joshua, had a wall surrounding the city, so korim b'chamishasar, they, like Jerusalem, read on the 15th. But kfarim v'ayarot gedolot korim ba'arba'asar. But villages, kfarim, and regular cities not surrounded by a wall, they read on the 14th. Ella shakfarim makdimin liyom haknisa. And that's the key ingredient. Traditionally, the 14th and 15th are the days which are read, but the villages, small places that don't have access to the same type of literacy or the same type of Judaica. I sit here and I have my own Megillat Esther that I read, not even from the pulpit, but I just have in the pew. That kind of Judaica wasn't as widespread. So these small villages, even if they're supposed to read on the 14th, they can work based off of the day that they would go into town and the market days during the week. And that would allow them to read on a day other than the 14th. And the second Mishnah continues, and we're not going to get into the details, elaborating how there is this phenomenon of reading on the 11th, 12th, or 13th. because these small villages would be accommodated to go on to the day of assembly where they were already going to the market, and they could then read there where they would have someone who could read for them. Good so far? That is all background. All right, so we have this window, and because of small villages having certain needs, they can read at different times. Okay. What we have as a rabbinic legal phenomenon, a halachic phenomenon, is one mitzvah with multiple expressions. It is a mitzvah of reading the Megillah, but it could happen on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. Even, and this is so interesting, even a standard year without any shenanigans with these villagers, there are two different dates on which the Megillah is read. That's an interesting phenomenon. That's not common in rabbinic Judaism, right? A mitzvah usually has a particular time. You know, it's almost like an international date line, and where it's Shabbat in one place, but not Shabbat in the other. So we have the phenomenon of different practices in different places. This is exactly what Shushan Purim is, Arlette. That's exactly what it is. Jerusalem celebrates on the 15th. And that corresponds to, the 9th chapter in the Scroll of Esther. Exactly. So in rabbinic analysis now, this is where we start to have to earn our bucks. We just read a simple Mishnah. Any questions that anybody has on it?
Just from chat, Arlette asked, is this related in any way to Shushan Purim?
And we covered that. Excellent. What else?
Does this phenomenon exhibit itself anyplace else does this phenomenon exhibit itself anyplace else where there's this sort of optional day?
It's pretty unique, and I want to go even further, Evelyn. Let me ask you a question. How many times do we read the Megillah on a regular Purim?
Twice.
Right? There's the morning, but there's also the night before. So it seems to be that Megillah, something with Purim, there is the developed practice that we have a multiplicity of dates on which it's read, but even on the dates that it's read multiple times. And this is an interesting phenomenon.
But we have that with Tisha B'Av also.
How so?
We read Eicha twice.
Fantastic. But could you read Eicha on the 10th of Av?
No.
So once we have multiple pieces of recurring, appearances, it's something to look into. Right? Arlette, Tisha B'Av, okay, that's the thing of the scroll of the day, and we do it twice. We double it up. But once we have it, and that's fair. And liturgically, how did that come to be? Right? Because that's not the way we do it with the other scrolls. That's fair. But here we have the added phenomenon.
Right.
What else? Absolutely. Kayla's pointing out that there actually is a deferral option, but you can't read it on the 8th. Good point. Thank you, Kayla. So I have a very simple question that will start our series, and then we will move into the loftier. If you're one of these villagers and you're coming in Thursday morning to read the Megillah on the day of assembly, what'd you do about Megillah at night? The Mishnah pulled a fast one on us. 11, 12, 13. What about nighttime? they're makdimin liyom haknisa. So we're going to address that simple question. It almost feels like a technical nudnik question, almost like the bad reputation that Talmud gets, that it's so focused on the technical in a pejorative sense. That little question is going to be our mountain. From that molehill, we will see heaps and heaps of rabbinic literature and wisdom. So before we get there, let's actually take a step back. Right? Everyone understand the question we're asking? Sure, you might have flexibility of when you read it, but that's only the daytime. What do you do for the nighttime? If I'm in a village where I don't have the wherewithal for us to perform the ritual, so, okay, I come in the morning, but what about nighttime? That little question is going to reveal different methods of rabbinic study. So let's look at the Talmudic source for reading it twice to begin with, okay? If you're following along, now we're in source number 2. And I'm going to share the screen. Babylonian Talmud, Megillah 4a. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, who was an early Amora in the land of Israel, part of the transition from Tanaim to Amoraim. He said, Chayav Adam likrot ta Megillah b'layla v'lishnota bayom. You have to read the Megillah at night, and you have to lishnota in the day, Shneamar, right? And this source, which is serving as a proof text, is not going to be something which says, read the Megillah twice. It is going to be a more indirect form of rabbinic exegesis. Elokai ekra yomam v'lo ta'aneh. Right? I call out to God by day, but God doesn't answer. V'layla, and I do so as well at night, calling out v'lo dumayali. I call out during the day and get no response, and I call out again at night. So it shows that there are two calling out. So therefore, you have to read it once at night and once during the day. Anything you notice about the formulations, about this text, about this interpretation from Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi?
Why does he connect the two? Why does he connect the two? Watch the pasuk that's quoted to Purim. Why is that connected to the Megillah altogether? I don't see any reference.
Good. Let's get creative here, Evelyn. He takes a verse that demonstrates that God isn't listening during the day or at night and says, this shows the reading of the Megillah. So connect the dots for me.
To me, it sounds like you shouldn't read it at either time.
Well, you're calling out, but that doesn't mean you're getting answered. How can we see in this exegesis some sort of Megillah adjacent reference?
Hashem's not mentioned in the Megillah, perhaps.
Interesting. So God's absence in the Megillah is this, you're going to have to finish the sentence. So it's kind of like God not answering.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying we're doing the action of reading the Megillah when there is no God in the Megillah. So here you see the action of calling out where there is no God.
And if we were doing a course on the scroll of Esther, we would talk about the absence of God. Does that mean God was pulling the strings, right, in a more traditional view? Or would you, have a little bit more of a subversive read about our role in taking initiative in geopolitics? Clearly, what Evelyn is surfacing, though, is it is not obvious that this verse has to do with the notion of A, Megillah altogether, and B, reading it twice. Okay, let's continue in the passage. I'm on the second line here. So first we had Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now we have Savor Mina. So some understood from this teaching, Lemekriya Bilelia, Ulemitna Matnitin Dida Biyamama. Some understood from this teaching that we are to read it at night, right? Chayv Adam Likrot et HaMegillah B'Layla. You are obligated to read Esther at night. But by saying Vilishnota Bayom, right, which can be repeat, but also could mean study, maybe you study its Mishnah, right? So instead of reading twice, you would read once, and then you would have a Torah study in the morning. Savor Mina. So here's my question, friends. Who is speaking? The first statement is attributed to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. I can give you his biography. I said part of the transition team going from the Tannaitic age to the Amoraic age, right? I can tell you he's an Amorah, lived in the land of Israel. He's a first generation Amorah, first half of the 3rd century. He lived in Lod. I can tell you things about him. Who is Savor Mina? They thought, based off of this teaching, who's speaking now?
The stama?
What'd you say, Rachel?
The stama?
Welcome to the chat, right? The anonymous editorial, Baal HaGemara, whatever version you want to call it. Rachel said the stama, right? Stama de Gemara, right? The editors, the redactors. Some sort of figure that is putting all this together. So we have Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's teaching. You got to read it twice, and his interesting hermeneutics with the verse that Evelyn wasn't convinced of. We'll get back to that. And then we have, oh, by the way, some people thought Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi meant you only read it once and you study it the second time. But that's not attributed to anyone. That's just being presented anonymously. So what role does that anonymous voice play? And that's going to be an essential question that we're going to deal with. Let's get back to our passage. So Savor Mina, they thought to say, based off Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's formulation, that they should teach the Mishnayot of Megillah in the morning and read it only at night. But Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Amar lahu Rabbi Yirmiyah, no. L'didi mefarsha li minei de Rabbi Chia bar Abba. I learn what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was trying to get at from Rabbi Chia bar Abba's teaching. Right? What was Rabbi Chia bar Abba's teaching? It was, I should highlight that. Kegon da Amri Inchi. No, it's as the euphemism goes, as the parlance is, the vernacular. People would popularly say, Avor Parshata de Vatania. I will go over, I will finish, I will study, I will read this section, this Parshata, right? This Parsha, this section. Vatania. And then I will repeat it. So just to get back to our biographical conversation, we had a first generation land of Israel rabbi teach something, an anonymous layer, then say, hey, by the way, some people think it means this. And then we have a mid-3rd century, 2nd generation Babylonian Amorah who says, oh, no, let me set this straight by quoting Rabbi Chia bar Abba, who was a land of Israel, right? Another Palestinian Amor. Right, so there's a little hot potato going on. Something comes from the land of Israel, then there's an anonymous suggestion, and then cited from a Babylonian Amora, something from an Amora in the land of Israel. And all this gets to, no, it doesn't mean that you read it once and then study the Mishnah, but you read Megillah twice. And now let's conclude the passage. Itmar Nami, it was also taught. Who's saying that? Wait, what? Right? These are the compilers. These are the people putting the strands together. So Itmar Nami, Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Ula Bira. Rabbi Chelbo says, in the name of Ula, Chayav Adam Likrot Megillah B'Layla V'Lishnota Bayom. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's teaching. Shenemar Leman Yezamercha Chavod. In order to, let my glory sing praise to you, God, and not be silent. So, God, my Lord, I'll give thanks to you eternally. A different verse from Psalms. And what we have that emerges is we have a section of Talmud that is constructed. It begins with a land of Israel teaching, then an anonymous question, then a teaching in the name of an Israel rabbi from a Babylonian rabbi, and then ultimately we have another Amora at the end of the 3rd century, right, a later generation from Babylonia, Rabbi Chelbo, in the name of yet another Amora, Ula from Bira. All of these attributions and statements are coming at us. The biographies are somewhat clear, somewhat unclear. But what about the content? What is this last concluding piece, right? That's taught in the name of Rabbi Chelbo from Ula. What is this doing in our section, our sugya? It uses the same vernacular, the same formulation as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, but what is done differently? What is different here at the end?
Do you mean it's a different proof text?
Absolutely. It's a different proof text. Evelyn, what do you think of this proof text?
Could you put it back up? I can't see it any longer.
Sure. It's not, and God was silent when I called out, but rather it's so that my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give thanks to you forever. Right? So on the one hand, I want to give praise and not be silent. That's A. And then B, I'll give thanks to you forever.
So I just don't see how either one relates specifically to a Megillah. It could relate to prayer. It could relate to learning. It could relate to anything.
Great. And is it Leah or Leah? If you're not you're not a panelist, so you'll have to type it out for us. But as the person from the family Bourdain points out, there seems to be a different emphasis in the two different verses. The first is supplication, is need, is calling out, and unanswered prayer. The second is praise. So in all of this, what emerges is that we have two readings of the Megillah. Forget that we have a number of calendar dates on which it's possible to read Megillah. But even within the one practice of Purim, we have two dates. And so now this is really where our two frameworks will diverge. The most important question to ask in the academic method is historically, how did this develop? When did this happen? I did not read this in the Scroll of Esther saying that we're supposed to read it twice. Did Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi come up with this? Is he sharing a practice that goes back generations? The historical development. But in the yeshiva, we're asking a very different question. In the yeshiva, we're asking, if we're reading it twice, what's the nature of it? What is sort of the intent we're supposed to have? What is the meaning making going on with these two? What's more, what religious character is this trying to? Great, thank you, Leah. What character is this trying to instill? What religious disposition? The academy, looking for the historical development. The yeshiva, trying to understand the nature and character of the dual reading. And so we actually have already early on medievalists that talk about, okay, what's the nature between the night versus day reading? And here I apologize, it's one of those where the Hebrew is, up top and the English is a little bit lower. So I'll try to keep it where you can see both. But the Rishonim, the medievalists, comment on what the relationship is between the night and day. The Tosafists cite the right? 12th century, early Tosafists. Right? We have Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and then Rabbi Chelbo in the name of Ula from Yira, with this teaching that you read it twice. Omer Ri says, the Alfagav de Mevarech Zman Balayla, even though we recite this Shehechianu, right, on the blessing for new occurrences and mitzvot at night, Choser Mevarech Oto Bayom. Right, this is always a tricky thing with like second day Yom Tov. So here we have it within Purim. Even though I recited the Shechianu at night, I recite it again during the day. Why? Shekore Bayom Chayev Likro Balayla. Because you have to do it twice. V'ha'ikar have biyamama. But which is more important? The daytime. And why is that? Because the daytime was mentioned first in the formulation, right? Right? Va'ikar have biyamama came in sheskiru akatav tchila. Right? It was written first that way. V'gam ikar aseuda biyamama. The mitzvot of Purim take place during the day. So therefore, the Ri said daytime is more important. You fast forward a few years, right? Elazar of Worms, Elazar Rokeach, the Sefer Rokeach says, Al Mikra Megillah Ikar Balayla, Al Mikra Megillah Afal Pi Shechayev Lomer Bayom. Even though you have to read the Megillah during the day, the focal point is at night. All right. The Ri said, oh, well, it's mentioned in the verse that you read it during the day. You could point to the Amoraic formulation, where it says Chayev Adam Likrot Megillah Balayla first, right? And then Lishnota B'deh. So we have this rabbinic teaching that you double up Megillah. And then we have this medieval dispute. Daytime or nighttime, which is more important, right? If you're going to say the nighttime, you're going to have to account for that Shechianu issue, not our topic right now. But all this gets to, what does it matter? What do we care? What's at stake? And that Rabbi Soloveitchik went to town on. Rabbi Soloveitchik is a classic yeshiva Talmudist, a classic brisker. He's not interested in the historical development of halachic phenomena. He's interested in understanding the essential character of our halachic principles. Rabbi Soloveitchik and his family's methodology, right? His grandfather is really the not just the founder, because in many ways he was just accenting something which already existed, but he is certainly the trailblazer of this method, where we are less concerned with trying to decide the question, is night more important or day, and rather trying to demonstrate what are the animating values behind each position. So Evelyn, here's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Rabbi Soloveitchik says that Purim is a holiday of two character traits. Two character traits. The despair of Ta'anit Esther and what it feels like to be a Jew who's uncertain about their future. The desperation of tearing our garments because of the existential uncertainty. And then the ultimate redemption and the joy and the praise that we owe God for making it through such tricky times. Those two aspects of the holiday correspond to the different proof texts. When we cite, I'll call out to God and God doesn't answer, and Balayla lo dumaya li, that there's just silence, that's highlighting the desperation, the fast of Esther, the uncertainty. But later on in the section, the passage, when Rabbi Chelbo, in the name of Ula, says we're reading Megillah twice because it's not out of supplication but praise. I said it wrong. I got to say it right because I say it every day during davening, right? I'm doubling down on the redemption, the saving aspect of the story. I don't accent the fast of Esther uncertainty. I look more towards the redemption and the ultimate victory of the story. Friends, what you have here is a classic Brisker two aspects analysis. Someone earlier said when we talk about yeshiva, there are two concepts. The Megillah has two animating values. What should you be thinking about? Are you supposed to think about the first few chapters where things are going wrong and the despair? Or are you supposed to think about the redemption? What is the nature of reading Megillah? This is classic yeshiva analytic philosophy. You take a halachic phenomenon and you see two dimensions. Is it about despair or is it about salvation? And like his grandfather would typically say, this is tzvei dinim. Rabbi Soloveitchik's clue leads us to say there are two halachot. If there are two possible readings of Megillah, maybe each reading of Megillah accents a different component. Nighttime, coming off the heels of Esther, maybe that has the connotation of the first few chapters, the despair. But daytime, once we already had our celebratory, evening, post-fast, post reading of the Megillah, the daytime, that's the salvation. And so what we just did was we took a passage of Gemara. We saw two ideas represented in it, and we suggested that maybe each plays a role in our contemporary practice of reading Megillah. The two different Megillah readings maybe represent two different animating features of the holiday. Sound good? So now we can take that very same methodology and ask, if the two different readings on one day of Purim are the same, is my reading changed based on reading it on the 11th or 12th? If I'm reading the Megillah on Tanit Esther, not post Tanit Esther, does that mean that I should accent a different feature? Should I have a different intent? Does it change the character? Now, one of the things that's really hard about the yeshiva learning is very often there are no practical differences between them. I'm giving two options. They kind of are amorphous. They are deeply conceptual. But the methodology is the same. The Mishnah, we have 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. Is that a homogeneous group of readings, or do they have different character? Similarly, when you read it twice in one Purim, is that a repetition? Or maybe are we accenting different features? Thoughts, questions about the yeshiva analysis here of this section?
I just feel that the analysis that is attributed to Purim and the Megillah can really be attributed to everything else that we do throughout the year and every other Chag practically. There's a sort of a sad and a happy side to each thing that we do. Hanukkah, even Sukkot, even though it's biblical, you can apply this to anything. It's so broad. It's so it's just.
Do you think, Evelyn, that might be why it was instituted as a holiday, specifically because it was so broad and existential?
That what was instituted as a holiday? Purim?
Purim.
That I can't say. I would go to look for historical factors to answer that question.
Good. We're going to get into some of that now. Other thoughts, questions? Evelyn says, this analysis feels not very Purim specific. Okay. And Evelyn, truth be told, she never really bought into the Amoraim working over those verses. Other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the yeshiva method always has two, is it just a coincidence that it's two in this case because they're the two readings, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there could be six. We're going to deepen this. But the modern Hebrew term is an investigation, a chakira. And tonight, our chakira is the nature of reading Megillah emphasizing the despair, or is it celebrating the salvation? And we're going to do this next week, I can split the difference and say it's actually about the transition from one to the other. I don't need to be so binary in my thinking.
But I'm saying there could also be, okay. We could have a sugya that had more than two.
Absolutely. Next week, we're going to take a basic 2 and turn it into 12.
Okay. Thanks.
So good. Our yeshiva takeaway is this chakira, this investigation. Is the nature of reading Megillah about despair or about salvation? What are we emphasizing? And maybe the two readings have different foci. Let's get to our third topic. So we did multiple readings of different dates and within a specific date. Then we did night versus day. And now, what about that initial question of nighttime reading for the villagers? So one of the later Rishonim, Rabbeinu Nisim of Gerona, writes number 6 on the sheet. Right? Again, the villagers were coming in and they were given leeway to defer or preempt, to read earlier than their proper date of the 14th. And so Rabbeinu Nisim says, Umegillah Delelia, Efshar Delo Korala B'nei Kfarim. They didn't do it. De Megillah de Yom Ikar. Because daytime is most important. So just like they let them read on a different date, similarly, they let them skip the nighttime. But if we have a historical lens and we look at the evidence, there's another option. And this is what all academicians think, all historians of rabbinic literature think, and it's presented even by the 19th century rabbi of Vilna, Shlomo HaKohen. He wrote, actually, would someone be willing to read the English of this for us?
Additionally, it seems to me—
Thank you, Miriam.
And this is the primary reason, according to my thinking. In the times of the Mishnah, there was no institution to read the Megillah also at night. For the Megillah is only mentioned during the day, and only in days of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. They instituted it to read it at night as well. And they relied on the verse, "Oh my God, I called by day, but you did not answer, and at night, and there is no stoppage or surcease for me." And know that throughout Mishnah, there's no reference to nighttime Megillah reading. For daytime Megillah reading, according to the Mishnah, is permitted throughout the day, and it should have similarly taught in the Mishnah that nighttime reading is permitted throughout the entire night.
Right, so when the Talmud says on 20b that you can read the Megillah all day, why doesn't it say when the Mishnah says on 20b that you can read the Megillah all day, why doesn't it similarly say you can read it all night? Until Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, there was no reading at night. That's what Shlomo HaKohen is saying. That's what all scholars of history of rabbinic development suggest. We have no proof of its existence. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is not just codifying an obligation, he's initiating it. It wasn't pre-existing. And now, we all do too, but the villagers weren't worried about that. Because in the times of the Mishnah, there was none. So we have this same Mishnah, and we have different points of emphasis. In the yeshiva mode, we're trying to understand the meaning making. In the academy, we're trying to get things a little precise to trace the development of what's before us. We're going to spend a lot of time on this, but what I would liken it to is take all rabbinic literature and look at them as trees. In the academy, we're trying to get at the roots and test the scientific makeup of the roots. In the yeshiva, we're in a drone and we're trying to see the forest that the trees make up. With a more yeshiva approach, I got to start defending what happened with the villagers. With a historical approach, there was none.
What was the reason, Rabbi Yeshua? Why would Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi institute something new like that?
Great. So now is where you see these things converging. Do you want to have a historical reason? Do you want to have maybe a more ideological one? Maybe some of the ideas in the yeshiva animated the historical institution that the academy is pointing out. But Evelyn, without proper evidence in the academy, we wouldn't really suggest, we wouldn't propose. I want to close with something that I think would be helpful. Just kind of like a rough and dirty list. So features of our two methods, right? You have the academy, which is historical critical, or in Hebrew, mechkar. And you have the yeshiva, which is analytic philosophy, or lomdus. Now, by the way, lomdus is not the only way that people learn yeshiva. And in mechkar, there are many different approaches. But these are our broad schools. So in the academy, we're interested in the developmental. In the yeshiva, we're interested in the conceptual. How did it develop that we read twice versus, okay, we read twice. What's the point? In the academy, we're studying history. In the yeshiva, we're studying essentialism. What is the defining feature of reading the Megillah? In the academy, it's a work of literature that obviously has legal and narrative components. But in the yeshiva, we're really just looking, bottom line, at the phenomena within the law. In the academy, we are very in tune with the attributions and the speakers, who is saying what. In the yeshiva, mostly they're just opinions. It's not all that important identifying who said what. In the academy, we certainly are focused on that anonymous material, the editors, the redactors, the stam. In the yeshiva, that's all just part of the tradition. It's not as important. In the academy, we are reconstructing the layers here. So Rabbi Shua Levi instituted it. What was Rabbi Chelbo doing? Is that just a reformulation? Is that a parallel phenomena in the land of Babylonia? What's happening? In the yeshiva, we're just interested in the frameworks being established. We're not really looking to reconstruct. We say, here's what we have. Now, what is that? What is animating it? What is that all about? Our last word, and Kayla, can I ask you to share that PowerPoint? I appreciate it. Is just is one challenge that we're going to have in this course. And that is, I haven't made a source sheet in 10 years with without some degree of representation of different Jewish voices. Certainly including voices of folks who are non-male. And in this course, we're really dealing with the primary material, where, Mishnah, Tosefta, Midrash Halacha, Yerushalmi, Bavli. This might be the only session we have that even quotes a commentator. So I just want to own that this doesn't live up to my own expectations of a proper representation and deepening of a research in Jewish Torah that includes people other than men. And at the same time, because we're focusing on the primary texts, I think the cited voices are going to be, the voices from the tradition, which are almost exclusively male. For each session, maybe I can offer some extracurricular, maybe some bonus readings. Maybe that's a good idea. But I wanted to name that and also offer to open up a dialogue about that to see how that comes off. I know for some of you, it's like, no, I want to learn Torah. And others, it's like, yeah, this isn't the real representation. I can't find myself. So I wanted to name that, own that, and share that. Next week, we're going to study brachot, blessings before eating food. We're going to think about them conceptually, historically, and their development. And we're going to further our appreciation for these two methods of Talmud study. My email address is on the sheet. I'm rabbi@columbia.edu. If anyone wants a head start to look at material beforehand, if anyone has challenges, thoughts, feedback, I am all ears. Otherwise, thanks everyone for taking the time, and I look forward to a wonderful month together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks.
And learning. Sphere Zvan is kicking off this week with classes from Sunday to Thursday. And if you want more classes coming up, there are 2 classes starting this Thursday. Our weekly discussion on the Parsha rotating class continues at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And I Sleep But My Heart Awakens with Rabbinite Leah Sarna is starting this Thursday night at 8 p.m. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for learning. Have a good night. Take care.